And so you have this issue of what are we going to tax in Nevada, right? And so there's been obviously a discussion of corporate income tax. That's probably not going to go anywhere because you have to create a much bigger regulatory framework for that. There's been a lot of discussion about passing on a sales tax or expanding what you tax in Nevada, lowering the rate and essentially putting in some services on there. That makes it kind of difficult to sort of figure out a fair way to do that. And it would be kind of very difficult when you go get your haircut, all of a sudden you're starting paying taxes and you have to collect all that there. You have the Monty Miller who wants to essentially raise the tax, what the modified business tax, which essentially is a tax on number of employees you have. It's a head count on that one there. He argues it's the fairest one, but of course he represents a bunch of businesses that make a ton of money in Nevada but don't have any employees on this one there. So one of the things, the unique things about the Nevada tax code is we're a lot like Delaware, that it's very easy to incorporate a business in Nevada without even actually having a physical presence here. So, favorable rates here. So he wants to sort of expand that. The governor says you can't raise enough revenue doing it that way there. So it'll be obviously interesting. Roberson has said, and he's running the revenue committee, that he wants to have something out of the Senate in March is his goal. We'll see if he can actually do that there, and obviously we'll see what will happen once it shifts over to the Assembly side, what they come up with there, and that'll be very, very interesting there. Now, with this sort of context that's going on here, right, the question is how much leverage the Democrats have on the 2/3 vote, and for what purposes can they use that for, right? Because there's a lot of things they're not going to like in this session if the first 3 days are an indication of that. So they're going to have to sort of pick their fights about how they want to use that there. And then, of course, you also have to remember here, we're dealing with a body that is institutionally one of the weakest state houses in the country. Right? Yeah. It still only meets 120 days every 2 years.
It's ridiculous.
Right? It's sort of ridiculous given what the state's grown and how many challenges we have. And so you have this very, very weak body. The governor's office is very, very strong. The executive branch is very, very strong here. And if you watch the hearings, what's kind of stunning in the first couple of weeks is you have all these new legislators. And you think about it, if you're a legislator, right, you ran for office on maybe 1 or 2 or 3 issues. Now all of a sudden you're sitting on all these different committees that you have absolutely no background and even maybe less interest in here. So what's amazing to watch in these early days of legislature is when the executive branch comes in, the various bureaucracy and the bureaucratic agencies, they come in, they make their presentations, and no one has any questions for them because they don't know what to ask. And this is one of the consequences of the term limits, right? You lose all this experience in there and the sort of institutional knowledge there. So it really empowers, at least early on, the bureaucracy, and it certainly empowers the lobbyists. Of course, they're always empowered there. So something to think about here, as we sort of watch this here, is that they're working in a very, very compressed time frame. This morning I had a nice conversation with David Damore, who used to be the Secretary of the Senate until the Republicans came in and put him in something else. And we sort of talked about some of these issues here about, how does it, what's up with the policy making? I mean, how do they do this here? And because you typically see it's very, very piecemeal. It's very, very short term. And if you want something big, it seems to have to come from the governor. Right? The governor has to sort of drive the policy there. And I asked him, I said, why is it? I mean, these people are well-intentioned. They go up there. And his take on it was, there's so much, they're going to process 1,000 pieces of legislation in 120 days. Right? And just the grind of it, day after day, working through the legislation, getting the hearings, figuring it all out, plus all the caucus meetings and everything else that goes on there, is even if they want to sort of think big and revisit policies and sort of what did we do 2 sessions ago, how is that working now, they just don't have the capacity to do it. So you end up with this situation in Nevada, and it's not unique to Nevada, but I think it stands out here the most because of how rapidly things have changed here. All right, you have a huge growth down here. You have a huge diversification of the population here. You have a change in the politics, right? Who would have thought, just 10 years ago that when we were voting, when the voters, I should say, put prohibition of same-sex is in the Constitution. Now it's no big deal on this one there. But institutions in the status quo in the institutions lag significantly behind the social and economic and political changes in society. All right, and so there was a bill 2 years ago that would allow for annual sessions. It was a well-written bill in my view, right? Because the 120-day cap is not that old. It goes back to the late 90s. Right? That's when it went in, and Raggio at the time put that in there. My suspicion, as a skeptical Southern Nevadan, is he put that in there because he knew the South would become powerful in the legislature just based upon their numbers. And why would I want to make this more powerful? So I think he intentionally sort of weakened the legislature, is my take on that. Of course, he's gone, so I can't ask him that. I'll maybe tell me anyways there. But there was a bill anyways that would allow them to have annual sessions. Now what's interesting about this is it becomes a partisan vote, right? That expanding the legislature, and it wouldn't expand the days, right? It's 120 days, but what it would do is make it 120 session days as opposed to 120 calendar days, and allow that to be spread over 90 days in, say, the odd year and 30 days in the even year, right? And that's a huge difference, right, between a calendar day and a session day. Right? So right now, they're all going to come home on Saturday and Sunday. Right? That's what they do. They run to the airport on Friday, they come home, and then they go back Sunday night. Right? Those 2 days that they're here, they count as session days. I guess they're 120. So if you had calendar day, they could come home, those wouldn't count. Right? And you'd be able to not be so compressed there. Now the question is, of course, will the Republicans, now they're the majority, vote that through? My guess is they probably won't. And so we would have to start again in 2 more years, assuming the Democrats get some control in 2016 here. So this is what as a social scientist, this is what I'm interested in, right? I'm interested in structure, I'm interested in institutions, I'm interested in rules and how those affect behavior. And so as part of and I can see that from the outside, but what I don't get to see is why there's never a vote where all the Southern Nevadans oppose the Northern Nevadans. There's never, ever that vote. I've done scorecards the last 2 sessions, and there are no votes that look like that. There's essentially 2 votes that come out of the Nevada Legislature. They're unanimous, about 80% of the time, or they're partisan. And that's the only vote you get. And that seems crazy to me. And if you watch the debate, you never see the yelling or using the committee hearings to stomp and make political points. It's all very, very consensus-oriented there. And I was sort of struck by this and trying to figure out why this is the case. Is it the 120 days? Is it the strength of the party caucuses there? But it creates a legislative environment that's very much unlike other legislatures out there. And so I've got funding, and part of what I'll be doing over the next 4 or 5 months as they're in session, I'm going to take trips up there and try to get the legislators to talk to me. I don't know if they will. But I'll end up essentially doing a lot of observations there and trying to figure out sort of what's going on, and the end result of this will be a product that the Lindsay Institute will put out, and it'll be sort of an overview of the policymaking capacity with recommendations for how we might think about aligning this institution where the people are supposed to speak with to really serve the people's needs there. Because right now, I think the legislators are well-intentioned and they want to do the right thing. I don't think they have the tools available to them to do that. A big part of this, of course, is also a part-time legislature. Right? Is that these people, it's a tremendous sacrifice to serve in our legislature. They're not well compensated for their time. And I've talked to folks about this, and they'll say it really hurts recruitment of good people that you might want to serve in there. And it hurts them during the interim session when they're not really in session, but they look like they're really in session because they can change the budget. All these other things that you wouldn't think of legislators could do there. And they say, I can't go to these meetings, I can't do this or that, because I gotta go to work. All right? And so this is another sort of problem that we have. You know, that there's the advantages of the part-time legislature, of course, is that you get people who are more in touch with their communities in theory here, but this is a real strain. So you end up essentially with sort of wealthy folks who all tend to work for law firms who also have lobbying shops in their law firms. On there, there's a great piece that Kyle from the Sun did the other day on the sort of inherent conflicts of interest in the legislature, or you end up with a lot of retirees who have income or other sources there where it's not that big of an issue there. So these are sort of some of the things that, we like to say were sort of two problems in Nevada is we're sort of what we call West Dakota, what my colleague Rob Lee calls it, is like we run our government like we're a state the size of one of the Dakotas, but then there's a 2 million person, incredibly diverse, economically vibrant part of the state down at the bottom of it. And then you rely on these institutions that essentially were made when the state was the least populated in the country. And so we're trying to play catch up with that. And I'll just leave you with this before I open it for questions, right? Does anybody know when the Nevada plan was written? We know what the Nevada plan is. It's the plan for the state support for public education.
Was it 67?
Oh my God.
Yeah, so we still fund our schools with a formula that was written in 1960s.
Oh my God.
But it's a reason behind that.
What?
It's a reason behind that also too.
Which
is?
They did not calculate the population of growing so fast also too. So this is what I heard, that since the population and they was trying to play catch up like you said on it, they haven't been able to play the catch up game like they needed to play in this. So that's why we're still following that plan.
Yeah, and of course, about, the governor talked about this in state of state, right? It doesn't fund any of the sort of categories, English language learners, right? Special needs, gifted folks, and none of that is in there. So what it looks like you're going to end up doing is start the process of changing it. In the first category that'll go in there will be special needs students. And then they'll continue to fund other stuff like, the governor's laundry list of education spending as sort of standalone items, and eventually those would get rolled up into there. But we're talking, again, you're meeting every other year, you're doing this incrementally, you're talking about into the start of the next decade before you're really modernizing the funding formula that we use for K through 12. So this is, things that, you don't think about. As a social scientist, right, everybody's sort of thinking, well, the rules are set, you can't change the rule. The great thing about state governments is you can change them. And every other state has made lots of changes, but this one, we're well behind on that. And that's, my sense is the governance and the structural issues really inhibit the ability to make good public policy and be responsive and think ahead, right, in all these types of issues that we would like to do and that we see our neighboring states do, right? Utah, right, similarly sized state, but they seem to get their act together. Even Arizona with their crazy politics, right? They can figure some things out as well there on that stuff. So I'll leave you guys with that, and I'd be happy to answer